Hello, everyone, and welcome to round 7 of the North American Youth Championships. For today's round, there were some interesting games as the tournament is approaching the end. Definitely, we see more enterprising chess. Everyone is trying to finish off the tournament on a good note, and certainly it's getting harder and harder for me to make a decision of what was my favorite game of the round. In the girls section, I decided to choose this game that was played on board 2 in the girls under 16 between Erin Bian and Lucy Yang. Erin is one of the highest rated is the highest rated player in that section, and she's sharing first place. And I felt that the way she played this game was very nice in a positional fashion, and I feel that there's quite a bit to learn from it. So we had this Sicilian Sveshnikov with e5, knight b5, d6, as a very typical theoretical line that is often plays in high levels as well. Bishop g5, a6, and b5. White has to go knight d5 to stop the fork, and bishop e7. And after taking in f6, because knight takes d5 is a threat, of course, bishop takes. White has two options here to go for c3 or c4. Either one is quite well played. I think c3 is an older line, and there are plenty more games. And Erin did choose to go for this one, but c4 is quite interesting as well. Bishop g5, castle, and bishop g5 are quite two moves that typically get played by black. I think usually people castle and wait for knight c2 to go bishop g5, but I don't think there's a huge difference, but don't quote me on that. I'm not the biggest expert in this Sveshnikov variation. But black decided to go for bishop g5 directly, and they transposed to the main line after knight c2 castle. And here, the ideas for white typically that I see quite a lot, well, I saw in the past, were with h4 and g3 and try to restrict this bishop, but usually they end up playing this a4 move at some point. Here it was played in this particular moment, but this move is important in order to try to give white some kind of activity on the side of the board where they technically have a majority. So a4 and tries to destabilize a bit black's pawns. You kind of have to take rook b8 is an option, I guess, in this position, but then white can recapture, pawn takes, and then white proceeds with the development, bishop d3 castle, and I think queen e2 tries to put additional pressure, and white has the file. So with black, you typically, you want to try to avoid allowing those things to happen, so you take, but by taking, you are weakening this pawn. So black has that a6 isolated pawn, while white has this backwards pawn a5 in order to stop b4. b4 would actually stabilize the pawn in a6, and then c3 would be weak, but it would take black maybe a bit longer to attack. Bishop c4, bishop b7, and Erin decided to go for knight e3 immediately to see whether black was going to give that bishop or not. I think castle could have been played first, and then as a plan for black, typically what I've seen in the past is try to route the knight to a better location, maybe d7, bring it towards f6 or b6 to try to trade this one, but you don't want to go directly to e7. You just try to maybe keep it. If you go to d7, you also could potentially bring it to c5 to take advantage of some forkies. But in the game, Erin decided to go for knight e3. Black immediately recaptured, and now we have a very typical position of the Sveshnikov, where black has traded their bad piece, but they remained with a backwards pawn, and then there's this outpost for white that could benefit them, and then there's this weakness for black too. So knight e7 was played with attempts, in my opinion, to follow those arrows. King h8, maybe break through the center with f5 or d5. And looking at the position, the way the game proceeded, it just seemed like both players played the natural moves of development and just tried each move step by step to improve their position. And that was one of the reasons why I chose this game, because for a really long time it seemed that both players were really knowledgeable about the opening. They were definitely knowledgeable about, quite a lot of moves of theory. And then they kind of were familiar with the plans for some time. But then Black has started making a few inaccurate choices, which allowed Erin to step by step improve her advantage. And that's something that I want you to get from this game. So Black here played the move bishop c6 to chase the rook away, and maybe she was thinking that she might have some chance to maybe push a4 to try to improve advance the pawn, because sometimes when you advance an isolated pawn, it could make it more difficult for the opponent to take it. But I think Black didn't really follow through with necessarily the plan. Queen d7 was an alternative, or maybe queen c7 to try to finish up the development. But to me, it is important for Black to try to make this move happen. And so here, for example, if you make it, say white takes, I think Black has this move queen g5. Wait, maybe not queen g5. Maybe d5 first. d5 first, trade the push the bishop back somewhere, and then maybe even e4 and try to get the pawn back. And then if in this position after f5, if takes, I think this is still something that Black can do. And eventually this pawn will be captured back. So to me, all these development moves could work, but also this plan with f5 seems to be the idea in the position. I think Black is a bit restricted by space, and if you don't get to push this pawn, you're going to struggle. And Black did not push it. She played bishop c6, and now she did not go for a4. She went back for the right thing. But maybe this wasn't necessary, right? Because the bishop in b7 was fine. So okay, now she goes e4, right? So I still think this is the way to go. Just push the central pawn. You had a backwards pawn. You can push it, improve it a bit. Could give white some trouble there and get a bit more space. In the game, Black played e4, queen went back, and now knight takes f5. So this is would have still been my choice. This would have still been my choice. Lucy has had a good tournament here, so she's playing against one of the highest rated players. At some point when you're playing well, right, you have to play some of the top players. Knight d5 was played by Erin, and now Black is trying to trade the knight away. Everything seems to go pretty alright for both players. Black finally trades the knight, and Erin goes for the main plan, which is creating a pass pawn on the queen side. Now a4 was played. You kind of have to, because the pawn is hanging, right? So a4, queen d4, and here you gotta be careful, because eventually what white's gonna do is white's gonna find a way to push the b pawn forward. And you need to make sure that this one will not be connected to it once that happens, right? So this idea to go d5, I think Black has delayed it for quite some time. And the problem is that if you don't go d5, and this pawn will already be in c4 when you play d5, white will have the opportunity to keep two connected pass pawns. I know it looks a bit suspicious to put a pawn on a dark square, but I think that was the move and the whole idea for Black to try to maintain the balance. Instead, Lucy has tried to stop that b pawn from advancing, but you see these two moves back and forth here allowed white to go c4. And as soon as white plays c4, white will push b5. By doing that, this bishop won't be able to protect that pawn anymore, so that pawn will be lost. And when finally Black managed to get the chance to play d5, it was a bit too late, as I mentioned to you earlier, because now this pawn is on c4. Black already lost this pawn in a4, and now b6 was played and rook a7, and you don't have the chance anymore to take in c4. And this pawn pushed to c5 the next move, threatening c6. And even if you hadn't lost the a pawn, just allowing this would have been very tough for black. So I think this is an important idea that people should know. Coming out of your opening, you need to make sure you're familiar with the plans, what you want to do, what your opponent wants to do, so that you can make sure that the decisions you make are accordance to that, in accordance with your plan, and you have the ability to stop your opponent from potentially gaining more and more advantage. The things, you see how white has improved the position. So the bishop went back to f1 to free up the c pawn. Black seems that has not done much, right? And now finally c4 and b5, and there's nothing to do to stop it. So that was a very important move that was missed, unfortunately, by black, and Aaron was able to win in that position. A beautiful game. Even if the bishop b5 wouldn't have happened, c6 would have. And this was definitely a nice swing by Aaron. I hope you enjoy this analysis and you learned something from it. Thank you.